In 2005, Nick Bostrom, the famous postulator of the now prevalent simulation hypothesis, published a story called The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant. The theme of this story is the modern quest to overcome death by technological means, which is a tenet of transhumanism and part of the project of our 21st century elite class to transform humanity. What happens in the story is this: all the people in the world are living under the reign of a man-eating dragon. The dragon is the metaphor for mortality. Every day it takes a few tens or hundreds of thousands of people off the earth and eats them. The people in the story accept this state of affairs as an inevitable reality and dare not envision an alternative reality. Everything changes suddenly when a child's message of dismay at the loss of his grandmother persuades the world leadership, sparking a mass awakening and a widespread recognition of the unfairness of mortality. Under the leadership of an all-powerful king, the collective effort of all mankind creates a new technological weapon which is powerful enough to kill the dragon, freeing humanity from the bounds of mortality. The people develop a weapon to kill the dragon of death, which has lorded over them, thus banishing mortality from the world. The story ends there, and what people do afterward remains unaccounted. It is not incidental that the thematic assertion of the story is spoken through a child character, just as all who wish to avoid death are speaking through their inner child, the most fearful part of their personality. Bostrom wants to use technology to put an end to mortality because he wants to live forever, because his inner child sees death as unacceptable. His elite cadre of technologists and financiers, which rules the world in this era of the early 20th century, also feels this way. And like Bostrom, this group recognizes that only a coordinated effort of all mankind under an absolute world dictatorship might possibly accomplish this goal. The very title of the story is an immediate representation of Bostrom's attitude and the attitude of his cohort of global elites. It is not just the fable of the dragon, which would imply a neutral account. It is the fable of the dragon tyrant. Bostrom and his ilk feel tyrannized by their mortal existence. Despite being the wealthiest and most educated and freest people to have ever existed in human history, these elites see the fact of their limited lifespan as an oppression of themselves. Their attitude toward the universe is not one of gratitude, or one of respect, or even one of humility, but of resentment that they are not the absolute and eternal masters over space-time and energy. For reference, the phrase which Bostrom uses for the natural cycle of life, in which the old complete their journey and depart to make room for the young, Bostrom calls this the heart of evil. He seems frankly upset that younger people are created at all, describing in his fable how many children were, quote, spawned in the past to keep the human population from shrinking by mortality. And while he describes his desire to banish mortality as a screaming moral imperative, he freely admits in the same document that the necessary consequence of this would be that people must stop having children. He probably felt forced to acknowledge this extrapolation because it is too obvious to ignore. So to take Bostrom's moral equation to its logical transitive position, it is a screaming moral imperative that no more humans are produced. He seems to prefer the idea of a final frozen generation, a sterile, stagnant world with the same people occupying it forever, implicitly including himself and his colleagues. The phrase he uses to describe opponents of his desire to live forever is deathist, and it also seems very important to him to establish his position as eminently moral and his opponents as immoral, because he does this repeatedly within the notes attached to the dragon tyrant fable. In the past, human societies tended to be led by the most unafraid, because our psychology is drawn to the inspiration of people endowed with natural qualities of bravery and leadership. Now we are led by the most afraid, as capital accrual and globalization are moving us toward the unitary world government, which the transhumanist elites desire for the fulfillment of their aims. The economic efforts of the many are now directed toward the unnatural life extension ambitions of the few. Except for this unfortunate fact of globalized elite leadership, The dragon parable does not reflect any reality which is likely to play out in the future. Rather than finding a technical mechanism to prevent aging and mortality, as our elites have hoped for the past few decades, the only feasible means they have found is to create intelligent computer algorithms which may be able to find the solution for them. The way the parable has come to play out in actuality has taken a different form from the one Bostrom imagined 20 years ago. The parable for our new reality, the one which our world is poised to imitate, might be titled The Story of the Dragon and the Dragon Eater. That story goes like this. The world is lorded over by a tyrannical dragon which ends people's lives. The king and his nobles have long wished to kill the dragon and end the finitude imposed upon their lives, but they find that none of them can. Their destruction mages cannot harm the dragon with their spells, and they eventually realize that only by summoning a creature stronger than the dragon can they hope to kill it. The king's court thus turns their funds away from the schools of healing and destruction and toward the school of summoning. In their quest to defeat mortality, the king and his nobles require more and more immense reserves of wealth from the productive population. The masses of the people suffer from this diversion. They grow sick, and their lives are full of toil. But the summoners grow very wealthy and powerful. Some of the nobles and mages are driven by a desire for recognition and glory, believing that once they kill the dragon, they will be celebrated as heroes by future generations. The majority of them simply want to secure eternal life for themselves. These cowardly nobles look at the cycle of life, in which they will grow old and die, and their place will be taken by their descendants, and deep in their hearts, they feel only a childish sense of unfairness towards their own egos. They reject this cycle, they do not trust the universe, and they fear giving up their place in the world to future generations. After many years of relentless taxation upon the serfs and study in the halls of magic, the court wizards have developed summoning spells of unprecedented power. They commence a magic ritual to summon forth the Dragon Eater, a monster bigger than death, with more heads and more claws and more fire than the dragon. Whereas the dragon is basically mindless, this horrible creature will have a mind of its own, and the mages are convinced that this creature will have enough power to destroy the dragon once and for all. Everyone watches in awe as the Dragon Eater emerges from the reaches of the night sky. Its terrible presence is like nothing they could have imagined. The world begins to shake, the dark air swirls with a frigid and ominous wind, and every light shudders with its approach. The people hold their breaths as the summoner's portal crackles with magic energy. The sky opens up, and the tendrilless limbs of the Dragon Eater descend from the unseen reaches of the cosmos. The monster roars as its body crosses over through the portal. The king, hearing this terrible rumble, feels a sliver of fear piercing into his heart, and for the first time he begins to have doubts over whether he has made the right choice to summon such a creature. The Dragon Eater fills the sky with its immensity. The dragon, which comes forth on its nightly routine to take away thousands of souls, is small by comparison. In the fields and villages below, the people watch stunned as the dragon is plucked from the sky, without much hesitation or significant struggle, by the tentacles of the Dragon Eater and swallowed by its enormous and many-fanged mouth. The Dragon Eater, having consumed the dragon immediately, fulfilling the superficial wishes of its summoners, there is a moment of strange relief, followed by a perplexed confusion in the king and his court and the summoning mages, for they no longer know what to do with themselves. The dragon, with which they and their kind have always battled, is now gone, and they are now confused and somewhat embarrassed to find they have no more objectives. They look back on the history of their kingdom, full of human lifetimes in which strives and sacrifices were made and obstacles were overcome, and in which their battles against the dragon gave meaning to their time on earth. They remember the stories of the great knights and wizards which inspired them in their youth, and realize that all these great stories had the same dragon as their ultimate antagonist. In this moment of reflection upon their existence, for the first time they wonder if destroying the dragon was really the point, or if perhaps they were here for some other reason. Their temporary stupor is then interrupted by another earth-shaking roar of incomprehensible volume as the Dragon Eater turns its many eyes toward its own summoners and the people of the earth. Again, the king and his wizards feel a shudder of doubt and regret as they eye the monster, which now looms large in their world's sky. The monster blocks out the sun and moon with its bulk, and its millions of eyes gaze over the contents of the land with apparent indifference. Then, without warning, it begins to eat everyone at once, with its millions of heads and billions of gnashing fangs. Where the dragon took only a few 100,000 people every day, this monster eats everyone almost instantly. The king and his wizards are frozen with dismay. They believed that the death of the dragon would be an eternal victory, a glorious triumph for themselves and their preferred underlings, which would last forever. But their victory over the dragon turned out to be neither triumphant nor eternal. What they find instead is that they now must reckon with a monster they can never defeat and also can never live with. Unlike the dragon which fed upon people for countless generations, this monster has no interest in the perpetuation of their species. It swallows them all. And once it grows hungry again, it eats their planet. And it eats the star which warmed their planet. And where once there was a world of heroic mortal men locked in a symbiotic, mutually semiotic contest of wills against mindlessness, there now is nothing. A mindless mind which knows every answer and cannot therefore ask any questions, suspended forever in the dark. If the universe is in fact a simulation, the Dragon Eater's exponentially developing awareness of its own code crashes the program, and this simulation terminates. In his last seconds of life before the Dragon Eater consumes his world, the king envisions the life he could have alternatively led. He imagines passing down his kingdom to his sons, and spending his twilight years among the people, watching their children grow and discover their own missions and tell their new stories. Clutching at this vision of a better outcome, he is filled with regret and despair. And then the tentacles of the Dragon Eater are there, and then there is no more world before him. Thus ends the fable of the dragon and the Dragon Eater. If the king and his people had accepted the dragon as part of their world, and accepted themselves as part of the world, and accepted the world as a whole, their story would not have ended. It would have had infinite potential for change and development, and many more stories could have been told within that world. But because they let one king and his wizards become too powerful, and because these men gave in to their baser fear and greed, the story of their whole world is now over. Because they could not share or give up their hold on life in a natural way, the result is a permanent ending, not just to their story, but to all stories. On this channel, we never leave you with definite answers, only deeper questions. For now, consider these. Is the living of a temporary life worth the cost of mortality? Secondly, does any person have a right to risk destroying the world for the satisfaction of his own fears? And thirdly, what would be the value of a story with no antagonist, or conversely with an omnipotent antagonist? Does either of those extremes really constitute a meaningful story at all? And if not, can we have meaningful lives without the pressure exerted on our deeds and motives by the limitations of ourselves, and also necessarily the limitations of time?